What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Swagger Podcast, episode 3. My name's McKay. I'm here with my buddy Ryan Gibb.
Thanks for having me.
Second guest on the podcast. The first one went real well, so you got some big shoes to fill.
I know.
I'm just kidding. So, for some context, Ryan and I have been pretty good buds for a few years now. I moved down to St. George, man, it was like 4.5 years ago, and he had just gotten off his LDS mission, and we kind of connected here in St. George. And
yeah, it's been, when I got back January of 2016, and realistically, for those of you listening, I think there's a period in time where we all go through some adjusting, and I think McKay, you found me right when I had just started to get normal again, and that was like 10 months. I was like 8 or 9 months, I think, after I got back, and I was finally ready to just be a normal individual again, and that's when we met. And so you're right, ever since then, it's kind of crazy. We've gone our separate ways, but then we've also always come back. It's like it's meant to be.
something like that, a true love story.
Yeah, basically. No.
So, for those of you who don't know, Ryan and I are both members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and most young men when they turn 18 or 19 serve a 2-year mission. And so the stereotype is that once you get off the mission after 2 years, you're a little Akko Taco for a little bit.
Yeah.
I think I found Ryan right after that when he was getting back into his manhood and relearning how to acclimate to the real world. So.
Yeah, it takes a while. It definitely takes a while. But I think some of the things that we did, maybe as friends, at least helped me kind of come into my own as well. I don't know. I've always cherished the things that we've done, so I don't know. It's been a really, really good couple years so far. And I'm glad to be here. Second guest, that's an honor. I'd say
honor,
almost as cool as being the first. Screw your white branch, but whatever. I don't care. It's water under the bridge at this point.
Yeah, if you ain't first, you're last, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Just kidding. So, wanted to bring Ryan on. We've had some really awesome conversations over the years, and obviously the point of this podcast, this platform, is to learn about different ways that we can be our best selves, and a lot of that has to do with the way that we relate to different trials and circumstances that come our way. And Ryan and I have definitely related on a lot of experiences that we've had. And so, as I mentioned in my last podcast, I want every episode to have some sort of a focus or a theme. And so what I wanted to focus on in this podcast with Ryan, and we'll have him on in future podcasts too, but in this podcast I wanted to focus on dealing with perfectionism for one, and then figuring out how to be the most genuine version of ourselves. Ryan and I are in different stages of life, in that Ryan got married a few years ago, so he has a lot of different life experiences that I haven't had, and in the same grain of thought, I have a lot of experiences that he hasn't had, just given that we're in different stages of our life, but we're the same age, so we've gone through lots of different things, and so I wanted to kind of pick Ryan's brain on those two topics, because we both have struggled with perfectionism in our lives, probably resulting from a number of different things. Maybe it was partly a product of how we were raised, partly a product of the culture we grew up in, partly a product of just wanting to be the best versions of ourselves and really grinding on that stone almost to a fault sometimes. Yeah. So as the point of this podcast and platform is to be better versions of ourselves, I think we can definitely find ourselves getting lost in what that looks like truly. So wanted to start off, Ryan, just if you can give us some context maybe into just give us some context into first maybe like how you grew up and what you did. For some context, I'll tell you guys right off the bat, Ryan played soccer at Dixie State here in St. George, so he did that. He served an LDS mission for 2 years. So Ryan, if you just want to give us a little bit of a breakdown of kind of how you were raised, and then if you can, maybe segue that into, we can talk about perfectionism a little bit, and we can kind of spitball some thoughts there.
Yeah, well, let me just tell you a little bit, obviously, like you said, kind of how I was raised. So I was born in Utah, but very shortly thereafter, I moved to Colorado. And I spent the majority of my life in Colorado. But I would say that the experience that I had growing up is relatively different than most people. And that's because my dad's in the military. Now, I think when people hear that, oh, you were raised by a regimist, someone that's just hardcore, like high and tight all the time. I mean, my dad, if you ever met my dad, almost the antithesis to what that is. My dad is a loving, caring individual, and though the military has impacted our lives in a lot of ways, I mean, he didn't ever necessarily crack the whip on us, and I was never necessarily afraid of him because he was in the military. Now, that being said, there were certain parts of my life, like I said, that were affected. For one, when I was 8 years old, my dad was deployed for a year and a half, and I'm the oldest of two. I have a younger sister about 2 years younger than I am, and in an instant, before my dad left, he told me, he said, Ryan, you're the man of the house. And looking back at it now in hindsight, my dad regrets ever saying that, but in a lot of ways that I feel like has shaped me as an individual. Because I was 8 years old, and I have a mom, and I have a younger sister, and I felt this responsibility that I needed to step up to the plate. And I don't ever attribute that to like throwing away my childhood, but I think I took on this mindset that I needed to take on a lot of responsibility. Now, a year and a half passes, and you can say that, things come and go, but a deployment, as most people who are in the military might understand, sticks with you through the duration of your life. As a result of that deployment, my family's had to go through counseling. We've also had to struggle with individual expectations that we have, and also just adjusting to the fact that the world doesn't necessarily understand what you went through. Does that make sense? But when my dad got back, he decided to get, settle his career down in the military, figured out that's where he wanted to end up retiring, and kind of set up shop here up in Draper, Utah. Now, growing up, I kind of always wanted to please my parents. Maybe it was the fact that when my dad came home, I just decided that, I just want to be a really good kid. I don't want to ever be a problem, because when you go through something really traumatic, I don't think you want to be much of a burden on your parents. I think other people take a different route. Some people may rebel, and it's just not in my nature. I mean, I don't know what it is. I kind of have in my nature this desire or this drive to just always do the right thing. Maybe not always because I want to do it, because I want to make other people happy. And to some fault to my parents, probably. I mean, no parents are ever perfect. They really fed off the fact that I was a good kid, and it would always give me that positive praise, like, oh, you're such a good kid, and that made me want to be even more of a good kid and a better person. And now that I'm kind of out of the house, and as you said, as I'm married, and as I've come to mesh two other families, I've come to see that I don't necessarily have to be perfect to also receive that, the adoration of those that I love. And I actually attribute a lot of that to Shanna. I attribute a lot of that, Shanna, my wife of 3 years, I attribute that a lot to counseling, a lot to my religion, and personal growth. But yeah, so that's a great story. I don't think it was very articulate and like a timeline of everything, but that's a little bit about who I am. Like McKay said, I came back to Dixie State University to play soccer, and I would almost attribute that a lot to my perfectionism. If any of you have ever played sports or anything like that, I mean, I know you play basketball. Did you play football at all?
Just basketball.
Just basketball? All right. So you play basketball, and everyone knows that, I mean, a good coach is someone that can hound you, but also make, get the best out of you. Well, when I came out to Dixie, I think Dixie was going through this interim where it was impossible to find a good coach. We had a losing season the first season I was there. I think we won 2 games out of 14 that we played, including preseason. And when I got back from my mission, there was a little bit of turnover. The team was doing a little bit better, but in the next 3 years, we would have 3 different coaches. And one coach in particular sat me down, and I was like right off my LDS mission, and I hadn't really trained too much, and I was kind of getting my feet back underneath me, but I'll never forget what he said. He basically sat me down and was like, listen, you're not good. and he almost basically told me, he's like, I would sit you and play some random freshman over you because you suck. And that's basically, I mean, that's not word for word what he said, but kind of coming back and trying to get my footing again, that just hurt so bad. And it made me want to be even more perfect at that point. I've had to deal with that. I've had to deal with that and, you know, put that to rest. Eventually I finished my career playing soccer, and now I'm pursuing a career in medicine, which probably is also one of those careers that expects a ton of perfection, but I'm trying to keep myself level-headed moving forward. So, I mean, I hope that answers some of your question. It's just a ton about me. So, yeah, that's what I wanted.
That was perfect. So, what I want to emphasize is we're not here to say that what we've done or gone through is any harder than anyone else, that we have the perfect blueprint for what's going on. Obviously, everyone's individual journey is their own journey, right? And people go through some terrible things and then struggle with lots of different addictions or circumstances beyond their control that really affect them. What we're really just trying to do here is just break down what we've been through and share some tips or some ideas about how we've learned from those experiences and whatnot. So I super appreciate Ryan opening up about how he grew up and whatnot, and I'll shed a little light on my experience as well that is somewhat similar to Ryan, and that we grew up in the same culture, the same religion. I think it'd be fair to say that we had fairly similar parents as far as their parenting style, as far as we were both the oldest, we were both, you know, firstborn sons. We had probably some pretty significant expectations placed on us from a super young age until we left the house. And so while that's not some crazy challenge that I'm sure some people would probably laugh at or scoff at, that was kind of our journey and dealing with trying to live up to expectations that either we created for ourselves or that we felt were placed on us. So enough about me, though. Kind of turning back to what Ryan was talking about, I wanted to focus on maybe a couple of things that our listeners can take away from this episode as far as what we've learned from our experiences, maybe what we can try to focus on moving forward if we deal with perfectionism or anxiety stemming from expectations that we have on ourselves, and kind of how we've learned to just deal with those. So Ryan and I had a really good conversation a couple weeks ago on a drive back from a Las Vegas trip that we had, where we just talked about so Ryan's, I don't want to take the baton too early from Ryan and delve too deep into personal stories, but Ryan's been married, and I think as probably most newlyweds or people who have been married for a short period of time can attest to, I think there's some certain expectations that you place on yourself in terms of trying to be a certain version of yourself for your in-laws. Mm-hmm. And you can translate that to any relationship that you have. I think we all, to some extent, struggle to, we almost place this burden of expectation on ourselves to be a certain version for someone else, and almost try to live in a way that either impresses other people or fits into some stereotype of who they think we should be. And we talked a lot about how for a little bit there, Ryan had this vision of who he thought his father-in-law wanted him to be, and I'll let you dive into that a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But you almost came to the realization that there's no need for you to, one, try to please other people, two, fit some expectation that you think someone else has for you, and you don't have to pretend that you're someone that you're not, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you want to expound on that a little bit, maybe get some insight there, and we can kind of roll from there.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about maybe expectations and perfectionism. So a perfectionist wants to see the world a certain way, and regardless of if that's manageable or not, they want it to happen that way. Does that make sense? And that's what's called an expectation. So as you know, maybe a young kid, we have an expectation, you know, as a young man, the expectation that we are going to grow up and we're going to be successful. Now, a lot of things that we don't understand when we're young is that there are barriers that get in the way, and success is also kind of a loose term that can't just be one thing. Success means a lot of different things. But if we get stuck in only having one vision of what success means or what it means to be a perfect something, then that's a problem. And obviously you mentioned, problems or like rifts I've had with in-laws, and I think that that's very common. And I also want to kind of branch that out to the fact that this is something that's impacted me with almost all of my relationships, I guess I would say. And unfortunately, it's come out as I've gotten married, and my in-laws have actually they've had to bear the brunt of that, and that's because those are the people that probably most recently have gotten the closest to me, and they've started to pick my brain, and they've also started to piss me off. And when you live with your family for 18 to 20 something years, I mean, I moved out when I was 19. When you live with people for that long, you start to just kind of brush things off that they do, right? Or they kind of understand who you are and the tics that, make you just explode. But when you have in-laws or even new friends or new relationships, a new spouse, they don't understand. They don't understand those things that really do bother you. And as I realized the things that they were doing, and they weren't doing it maliciously, but it was just who they were, and for some reason it really irked me, right? So I've had to look introspectively and analyze what things I expect of the world and what things I need to let go. Now, we talked a little bit about how, and we have talked about in the past, how as a man, taking another man's daughter or another family's sister, or kind of taking them and saying, hey, I want to be with you and I want to create a family unit with you, there's going to be a little bit of struggle. For one, that individual comes from traditions that and ways of life that you never experienced, and in my opinion, I mean, I never even knew existed. I mean, I didn't know people did certain things, and that is actually probably been one of the best things that I've learned having in-laws, is that there's many ways to do things. Being a perfectionist, you almost seem to think that there's one way to do things, right? And I've noticed that when I've dropped that barrier, that there's only one way to do something, I've been actually more accepting of new ideas and new ways of thinking. But regardless, when it comes to these relationships and things like that, I've truly noticed that you as an individual, in order to be happy in this life, you can't accommodate to every, opinion or to every feeling that anybody else has, other than, I don't want to say other than your own, but if you go out and you're kind of accommodating to all these other people, you yourself aren't going to be happy. And that's something that I've seen, and I've only been married 3 years, which really isn't any time at all in the grand scheme of things, but I've noticed that when I try and be someone that I'm not, my own personal satisfaction in my own life goes down, and the more intense and rigid and rude I am to the people around me. And so, I don't know. I imagine you probably are experiencing something like that too, right? You have a relationship with Sammy right now, and you're probably experiencing that same kind of feeling.
Absolutely, yeah. So just, to compound on that idea, I think really what we're trying to get down into is that the only person that gets to decide your happiness is you, right? And we're recording this a week after some political unrest in Washington D.C. last week, and regardless of what quote unquote side you take, I think there are some lessons that we can learn from that. And I had a friend post on Instagram that there's only one person that gets to decide your happiness, and that's you. There are a lot of things that you can't control. The one person who gets to figure out what kind of life you want to have and the feelings you want to have is you. And so relating that to what we're talking about, regardless of whether you're in a situation where you're single, you're trying to meet people, you're trying to be the most genuine version of yourself, whether you're dating someone, or like in Ryan's case, he's been married for 3 years, and trying to figure out and work through his relationships that he's created. When it comes down to it, you have to figure out who you want to be and what makes you tick, and what you like to, how you want to be viewed and who you want to be. Because ultimately, we don't have control over what other people think. And Ryan and I have talked about instances where we've tried to either be someone we're not around a certain person, so that we can try and almost mediate a situation or further a relationship where, in all honesty, the other person probably didn't even know that we were feeling those things or whatnot. On our previous podcast, Wyatt and I talked about the fact that for the most part, other people don't care what you're doing. They don't notice what you're wearing or what you're doing. They probably don't really register what you're doing in your life. They more so care about what you think of them. And so I think we get caught up in this weird circle where we're always trying to either impress other people or live up to a certain level of expectation, when I think when it really comes down to it, it's trying to find that place where you're confident in where you're going, you feel good about who you are, you're being genuine with yourself, and being able to live in the moment. I know that's covering a lot of ground, and that's obviously way easier said than done, and it's tough to walk that line sometimes. But I wanted to bring Ryan on specifically because I feel like he's taken a few concrete steps that maybe we can try and focus on in our lives that have helped him get to the place that he's at now. So, and Ryan, you can be as personal or not as you want, but you mentioned that one thing you've utilized is counseling. And I think that's probably something that people are afraid of, be afraid to admit to other people that they're taking advantage of or utilizing. I don't think anyone wants to admit that they're going to a shrink, right, or talking to someone about very personal issues. But maybe let's talk on that or speak to that a little bit, and just talk about how or what your journey with speaking with someone else, i.e. a counselor, has helped you walk through some things that you've dealt with in your life, and why you feel like it was beneficial for you.
Okay. So like I mentioned before, obviously growing up in a military family, I think the vast majority of individuals, I mean, I might be completely wrong now, but I would say that a person's innate instinct when confronted with conflict would be to turn the other way. I genuinely feel like, and maybe I'm different, and I know certain people that we know are also different, that when conflict arises that they're headstrong right into it, right? But I don't think people want conflict, let alone do people want internal conflict. And not only that, I don't think people want to even admit that there's things wrong with them. Does that make sense? When people, there's actually a really interesting quote by a really wise gentleman by the name of M. Russell Ballard, and I'm going to butcher this, but he basically talked about how we aren't necessarily, I don't know how to say it, but he basically said that if you can sit and you can stare at a mirror and you can be alone with yourself and just be fine, you know you're doing something right. And the thing is, I don't think people are very comfortable holding up that mirror and saying, wow, that sucks. Oh, wow, that's not good. Oh, wow, that's not good. And you know why we do that? It's because we have the entire world telling us that we're not. And we also hold up the mirrors in our pockets, the cell phones, and we see reflections of all these other people that are like, oh my gosh, he's so cut. Oh, she's so hot. And then we look at ourselves in the mirror and it makes us feel even worse. And so instead of turning off what we have in our pocket, we decide to just throw away the mirror. And we don't want to look and see who we are beautifully, on the inside. And so, that's definitely a tangent. But when I started dating Shanna in the fall of 2016, I had a lot of things I had to figure out. First of all, was I needed to realize that Shanna's motives were very much similar to the opinion that you and Wyatt had, was that she really didn't care. I mean, she had no ulterior motive other than to kind of get to know me, but also just have a fun time dating. My motive was like, I need to get to know you as fast as I can, and I need to know if you're gonna be my life companion, and I need to find that out as quick as possible because I'm not trying to waste any time on you, right? Granted, she was a little bit younger, and I had maybe more of that mindset. But that being said, it wrecked me when we had this separation, or I don't want to say separation, but this struggle where I was pushing for one thing and she was just really slow and wanted to move things along really slowly. Now, to my frustration, that didn't really bother her, and it was bothering me immensely. I mean, I could tell I was just distraught in a lot of situations because I was overthinking things. I would talk to my family, and I almost had a horrible, it was disrupting the relationships I was having with my family because I was thinking so much about Shanna, and also this really, really big goal that I had of getting married and the immense pressure that I felt there. And my mom actually is a really big advocate for counseling because she goes to counseling. And she just signed me up one day, said, "Hey, I got you an appointment with a counselor." And I was pretty reluctant, I'll be honest. I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. And I actually had turned her down a couple times. And then one day I was just sitting on the couch in my parents' home, and I was like, yeah, I think I need to see someone. Because I was just brewing. And I couldn't look at the world because the world wasn't giving me the reflection that I wanted, but then I also couldn't look at myself because I was so hard on myself that I couldn't necessarily, I couldn't live I couldn't live without just judging myself or beating myself up. So I go to this counselor, and one of the first lessons she teaches me is that expectations are our downfall. And that an expectation, like we talked, an expectation is a decision to say, okay, I want the world to be this way, and it has to happen this way, or else I'm not going to be comfortable. She taught me that expectations are pre-decisions to be disappointed. Basically saying that the fact that I had expectations of anybody, of myself, of my spouse, of my family, and I guess of my future, the fact that I was deciding that things had to happen a certain way, I was already setting myself up to be disappointed. And I guess you could say that now in my life, to kind of, I've gone through counseling for 3 years, but that was probably one of the most drastic lessons that I've learned. Because now I try to live my life as much as I can in the moment. I try and also be as lenient, and I try also to be as open to other opportunities as possible, because if I'm so stuck in my way that things have to happen this way, I mean, what kind of life is that? You're not going to be able to branch out. And that's a pretty elaborate story, but I would tell you that I never would have come to that realization had I not sat down with another individual who looked at my life problems and didn't say, "Hey, I'm sorry. Hey, oh, looks like you had a hard life." In fact, she put that mirror in front of my face and said, "Stop. Look at yourself and look at what you're doing, and you're personally hurting yourself." And that's what I think counseling is. It's hard and it's a struggle. But to anybody out there, who is struggling with those internal feelings that you can't explain, but you do feel this expectation of the world, I mean, counseling was a lifesaver for me.
That's awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you opening up and sharing that.
Yeah, for sure.
I think a lot of us struggle when we see ourselves in the mirror and we don't look the way that we want to look, or we don't look the way that we thought we looked, or the way that we expect ourselves to look.
Yeah.
Whether it's physical or mental, or just in your life in general, if you look at the mirror and you're like, shoot, I wish it was somewhere else. I wish I was doing something else.
Yeah.
I think I really like what you mentioned when you said just you're focusing on living in the moment.
Yeah.
And that's so hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think we either live in the past and wish we had something that we used to have, or we regret things that we've done, or we live in the future and we think about, I want to be in this place at this point in time, or I'm working toward this thing. And we forget to just live in the moment.
Yeah, and the thing is with those is that living in the past is a sheer sign of developing depression, and a sign of always trying to be in the future is what we call anxiety. And I think that nowadays, and this is why I don't have social media, because I knew who I was. I know who I am. I know that if I am constantly looking at what other people are doing, what they did, or what they're about to do, I'm going to look at my own life and I'm not going to be satisfied, right? I'm going to look back at things that, oh man, I should have done that, and I'm going to get depressed. Or else I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, I need to do all these other things so I can look like that, and I'm going to get anxious, right? And I say in today's day and age, I say anxiety and depression is probably through the roof in our age demographic. And I would highly contribute it to, extreme expectations put on us by society, social media, and things like that. And I don't know. It is liberating to just kind of throw that all away, though I am also not free of problems.
Sure, man. Wow, no, I super appreciate that. I think especially with our age and demographic and younger, to not have social media, you're definitely in the minority. But wow, I super respect where you're coming from, because you're right. If you are looking at things other people are posting, you're either comparing yourself to them, or on both sides, you're either thinking, wow, I'm better than this person, or you're thinking, well, I'm not as good as that person, and either approach is not benefiting you at all.
Yeah.
The other person also has no idea you're doing it, so you're just hurting yourself.
Yeah.
And they ultimately don't care if you're looking.
People don't care.
Yeah.
Like you said, people don't care. And let's be honest. And we talk about things that, you brought me on, and I feel like I have certain life experiences that I'd like to contribute if I could. But I would say that learning that lesson of living in the moment, and also not having expectations, and also not comparing, has led me to find an individual that I know, and I'm talking about my spouse here, that I know is compatible with me. Not because I feel like she's the Instagram perfect individual, not because I feel like she's got her life all put together and she's gonna be 100% successful, but it's because I have gotten to know her for who she is, and not for who I want her to be, in this grand scheme of things. And I feel like people that are dating nowadays, they kind of get lost in that. They look at these relationships that people have online, or they have on YouTube, or they have, they have on the Bachelor or something like that. I don't know. They see these relationships that are almost impossible to emulate in real life. Granted, people do have that, but at what cost? Probably lots of money, probably lots of hard work, right? I would say that's been the best thing for me in my own personal relationship with her, is just not comparing what we have, and that's something that I cherish, but to the rest of the world. Because if I were to do that, I feel like we would taint and canker what we have. It wouldn't make it special. And my relationship doesn't need to be special to anybody else but me, and so why look elsewhere, right? That's kind of how I feel.
That's awesome, man. Wow. So things we can take away from that. You can definitely use social media as a mirror that isn't beneficial for anyone.
Granted, yeah, and I'm never gonna say like, down social media, it's a horrible thing, because I think social media does a lot of good. It connects individuals, and it also is a great way to learn. Holy cow, look what we're doing here, right? We're broadcasting, we're reaching lots of different people, and it's got its ages, it's got its purpose and its time. But with all things, we need to be able to control ourselves, to be able to handle, or I guess control, the technology that we have, and not let technology control us. So kind of that quid pro quo, I guess you could say.
That's awesome. So a couple of things we touched on. I think everyone's individual, but I think through the action of speaking to someone else that maybe isn't related to you or has a vested interest in your life, i.e. a counselor or a religious leader, I think there's a lot of power in that, because they don't have any vested interests. They're not gonna give you biased answers.
Yeah.
They don't have any reason for telling you anything specific. They're just taking a look at your life holistically and trying to give you some help and some advice. And so, again, if that's something that you want to pursue, I would definitely encourage that. It doesn't have to be a counselor. It could be someone in your religious circle, or it can be even just a friend trying to confide in someone and work through some issues. again, a lot easier said than done, because you kind of have to check your ego at the door and say, hey, I'm not
Very much
perfect,
so,
both
yeah.
to yourself and to this other person. But I think if you can either find someone you trust, or someone who doesn't have a direct vested interest in what you're talking about, I think there's a lot of power in that. And then the second part is, wow, I mean, talking about social media, and not that, again, social media is an awesome, I hate using the word social media is a tool. I hate that phrase, but it's true. Like, social media is great in a lot of ways. We're using social media now to broadcast this content, but I think social media can definitely be it can definitely be something that can hurt you if you use it to, even if it's subconsciously, compare yourself to other people. As broad of a statement as that is, whether it's yourself or your relationships or your life in general. And I almost feel like our generation and the generations younger than us feel this almost compulsive need to, quote unquote, post about everything. And I mean, I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of, oh, I did this thing, I want to post about it so that other people see what I'm doing, and maybe they'll think this way about me then. It's just an endless cycle, alluding back to the fact that people ultimately don't care.
Yeah. People
ultimately care about what you think of them, and they're focusing on that as we're all doing, so no one actually cares what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I think, as hard as it is, trying to just find a balance between, okay, here's who I want to be, here's how I want to feel in my life, here's how I want to shed my light, if you will, on the world in general, and how I want to project myself, and try your best to just roll with that. And I think once we get caught up in the comparison game, or thinking about the past or the future too much, like you mentioned, I like your analogy, when you're stuck in the past, you can get depressed. When you're stuck in the future, you can get anxious. And so trying to live in the moment, as hard as that is, and taking it one day at a time, and just living in the moment and trying to enjoy those simple experiences, I think is really where you can find a lot of peace and solace. So, well, that's an awesome segue kind of into the next topic I wanted to touch on, is how can we best find who we are and accept who we are, and not live trying to impress other people. Because I'll admit, I haven't perfected this, but I mean, stories that Ryan shared with me on that drive that I alluded to earlier were, I mean, regardless of who it is or who it was, I think we all have to come to a point where we're either going to be stuck in this game of, or this rat race of trying to be someone that we're not, just to satisfy someone else's expectations. So like for Ryan, like I'm gonna let him share the experience if he wants to, but he alluded to the fact that he and his father-in-law don't have a lot of the same whatever hobbies or passions or whatever. I've obviously been in a similar boat where I don't necessarily share certain passions or hobbies with someone in that position, and we've both found ourselves trying to be someone we're not, just for the sake of trying to do whatever, whether it's impress that person or fit this role that we continue to fit into. And there's no end game there. You're never going to and that goes back to even social media or relationships in general. You're never going to satisfy someone's unspoken expectation, because they either don't have it because they don't care, or the expectation they do have is not something that you need to take on. I think you just we need to project who we are and be comfortable with who we are. So, I mean, if you want to touch on that a little bit, and kind of take it from there.
Yeah, for sure. So on that, right, I think one of the biggest things that we talked about is like the stress of coming into a new family, right? And actually, since that conversation, it's really interesting, but I've also been able to like look in at my own family and see like reasons why I do things with them as well. I'm guilty of doing it with my in-laws. I'm guilty of doing it with my own family, with my friends. But there are times when I act a certain way because I feel like that's gonna make people comfortable, or it's gonna create a better bond between us. Now, you know, I guess we could isolate father figures, both my father and my father-in-law. I feel this immense anxiety to be something for both of them. One, for my father-in-law, I feel this immense anxiety to be this provider for my wife. I feel this desire that I need to show him that I'm macho man and that I'm the guy around these parts and that I can take care of your daughter, but I also have really good opinions and I have, a really successful future ahead of me. But that being said, I also feel this pressure to have a really, really strong relationship with him. And that's also something that I feel with my own dad. And so I'll find myself sitting alone with my father-in-law and I'll just be like kind of twitching, just thinking in my head, mulling over conversations that I feel like I need to be having. Like, oh, so what's going on here? How's this going for you? And I feel this immense anxiety. And in my head, I think that things are going pretty horrible because maybe we aren't connecting on a certain level, or maybe he's just not opening up the way I wanted him to. But as I have, I don't know, I guess you could say I've kind of grown tired of that. I've grown tired of feeling like I need to do things to either impress or I need to say things to make people happy. The more tired I've grown of that, the more I've actually just decided to sit back and listen and just let things play out how they go. Does that make sense? And that's actually something that I'm really trying to do now more recently is instead of coming into a conversation or instead of coming into a group dynamic, and I probably don't do this very well with our friends because I talk all the time, like I'm a big talker, but with these individuals that I feel these pressures with, I decided to come in and just listen and just kind of sit there and kind of let other people establish the rules of the conversation or of the situation. And what I've noticed is that when I let go of my anxiety, I'm able to see that they're not anxious about anything anyways. And like you said, right? That expectation is almost non-existent that they want to have that there. But it's also almost unfair to me, right? To feel like I have to be responsible for this relationship. Why is it on my shoulders that I need to do certain things to make this guy or that guy or this girl or that girl happy? It shouldn't be on my shoulders. I can play a big part in it, but it's a two-way street. If someone else isn't really making an effort to try and get to know me for who I truly am instead of for what other people say about me, well, there's nothing I can do about that, and I really shouldn't stress about it, right? And the same goes with providing as a husband. I guess you could say trying to prove that I am something maybe that I'm not. That for those of you that know me, I'm kind of an emotional guy. I'm also really in touch with my feelings. I'm not necessarily this big macho, like I'm really tough. I'm like gonna try and control the situation, and sometimes my wife walks all over me, and that's okay. But that's just how our relationship goes, and I don't need to try and prove that I am who I'm not because it'll make someone else happy. Does that make sense? And I'm not trying to allude to anyone specifically or anything, but I'm just trying to say that, when I calm down and I've just accepted who I am, but I also accept the fact that it's not my responsibility. It's not my sole responsibility to create relationships or to make other people happy. I find it easier to be able to accept them for just who they are. Maybe they don't want to talk to me. Maybe they don't want to develop a relationship. Maybe they're happy that we just sit here in silence, right? Maybe that's good for them. Are we gonna grow closer together? In my opinion, probably not. But that's not on me. That's okay. And you gotta let people be who they are, and you gotta be who you are, because if you're so anxious about being something that you're not gonna be happy. You're gonna probably resent them more, and you're not gonna really get to know them for who they truly are. And so that's why I think it's really important to just manage your anxieties, manage yourself and your own expectations of situations. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, man, that's awesome. I appreciate that, and I didn't mean to shed light on specific relationships necessarily, because I know obviously, you love your in-laws, I know
for sure.
And we're not here to call out specific relationships. I just thought it was an awesome example of we Wyatt and I talked about this on our last podcast. It's a tough fact to come to terms with, but some people just aren't gonna like you.
Mm-hmm.
And I deal with that too. I deal with being a people pleaser, absolutely.
Yeah.
Where I found myself trying to fit a certain mold, or in group dynamics create a certain vibe or situation so that I can almost take control of the situation, so that I don't have to to use your verbiage, get walked all over or be viewed in a certain way. When it comes down to it, A, people either don't care, or B, they might not not like you.
Or either, I mean, that's the thing. I think to say that people won't care is true, but it's also important to realize that there are people that care, but they don't care that you succeed. They want to see that you're not doing well, and those are the people that you can't surround yourself by, right? Because there are people that care, and I'll be real. I know that there are people that I would like to see not do well, and as bad as that is, I mean that's the honest truth. And those people probably shouldn't surround themselves by me, because I'm not gonna wish good on them, and that's horrible, right? That's horrible. But that's just kind of in our human nature. We're all competitive, and I'm very competitive. But I also know that people feel that same way towards me, and if I can't overcome that barrier, now granted, if someone were to come and say, listen, I think I always feel that you wish the worst for me, I would take a big pause and be like, oh my gosh, I'm a total dick. I need to like rethink my view of this individual, because I totally misjudged you, and I don't want that to ruin a relationship. But some people, for better or worse, really do want to see you fail, and those are the people that you do need to kind of say, yeah, I don't need you in my life. I don't need that. And that's why I think some people, I don't know if people know this, but you don't need to deal with people like that. If there are people that are negative in your life, if they're not giving you what you need, then why are you with that individual? Does that make sense? Now, there are certain people that you can't do anything about, and you have to have a cordial relationship with them, whether it be in work, whether it be a family, things like that. But you don't have to take any extraneous measures to make that relationship more intense or more, closer than it already is. I mean, that's not fair to you. And that's something that I'm also working on, is figuring out what relationships really important to me, what people are actually rooting for me, what people are rooting against me, and how do I surround myself by a good balance of both. Because I think the haters are going to push you to do better, right? And then the people that love you are just going to encourage you when you fall and stuff like that. So
I love that, man. Yeah, I mean, something I took from that specifically was, you said relationships are two-way streets. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think there are some relationships that we probably are all holding on to that maybe we're the only one putting the work in. And maybe those streets end at some point.
Yeah.
And it's maybe it's beneficial for us. And it's tough to accept that sometimes. But in any relationship, whether it's a friendship or a romantic relationship or a familial relationship, some people you have to have a cordial relationship with. You can only try so hard, and if you're putting effort in and it's not being reciprocated, there's no need for you to continue doing that.
Yeah.
If you feel like you're feeling anxious about that relationship, or that you're trying and getting nothing out of it. And you're right. I think for the most part, people don't care, but there are people who do care. Maybe want to see you fail, to have their own premonitions about you.
Yeah, they want to feel better about themselves. I mean,
sure.
That's nice.
Exactly. And so I think when it just comes to relationships in general, man, it's really just about being who you want to be. And I think, as cliche as it is to say, I think the people who truly care about you and want to be in your life, I think those relationships will manifest themselves. And maybe you'll have to will certain people or relationships out of your life as time goes on. But I think those who truly care about you and want to understand you on a deeper level and want to know you for who you are, I think those people will show themselves.
Yeah.
And there's no need to hold on to relationships that aren't beneficial for you if you try and
yeah,
those feelings aren't reciprocated.
Yeah, and it's ultimately, I mean, I think life is just so short, and I think, in the grand scheme of things, here now, life seems like an eternity, right? It seems like things are going to go on forever, but you only are in certain stages of your life for so long. For example, I was in high school for 4 years, and I came and I recently graduated from Dixie State University with my English degree, and I'm moving on to med school, right? I never thought I would graduate. Just when I was a freshman, I was like, oh my gosh, I have so long to go. And as a freshman, I also was like, I need to meet everybody, get to know everybody, have all these friends and things like that. And the closer I got to closing that chapter, the more I realized, like, wait, I have all these acquaintances and things like that, but who really has been there with me through the end, right? Who has been in this chapter of my life and has actually made an impact on me? And I can probably only name maybe like 2 or 3 individuals. And that's what I'm saying, like, there are chapters in your life that are so short. Why waste them with people that aren't helping you, or that aren't pushing you along or making you better, right? I'm never going to say that anybody should make rash decisions, because if you're uncomfortable with someone, that doesn't always mean that they're not good for you. Maybe that means that you have bad communication. Maybe you guys need to work on that, right? Maybe there's other things going on that you need to work on. I'm not saying that you should just cut all ties with people you hate, but if after all these things aren't working, it just doesn't make sense to keep those people around.
I agree, man. I think it takes a level of maturity to admit that to yourself. On a lot of stuff we talked about today, man, it really does come down to looking yourself in the mirror and saying, hey, am I comfortable with these certain things that I have in my life? And if there's some things you want to improve, by all means, work on improving those things. If there are some things you need to cut out from your life, whether it's people or habits, it definitely takes a level of maturity to recognize that, because no one wants to admit to themselves or to anyone else that they suck at something, or they're bad at something, or that they have a problem or an addiction or a bad relationship. But at some point, you have to start living for yourself and those closest to you. And I believe that those closest to you will help you along that path. So we're approaching the hour mark, and I kind of want to just summarize what we've been talking about. I super appreciate Brian coming on, and really, if we kind of had to put a cap on the conversation, I think what it really comes down to is trying to find out who you are and living that version of your life. And that's going to look different for everyone. And there are some specific things that we talked about today that I think could definitely help on that path. One being counseling. If that's something that you feel like would help in your life, I think speaking with someone who either doesn't have a vested interest in your life or that genuinely cares about you and speaking about what you're dealing with, I think that can definitely, there's definitely a lot of power in that. And I think that helps open up some things that maybe we don't realize ourselves, as you can probably attest to. We talked about that. We talked about trying to live for ourselves and not for other people. We talked about how we have a lot of mirrors in our lives, whether it's social media, whether it's just playing the comparison game with people we have in our lives. And at some point, you either got to decide, I'm going to continue this rat race or I'm not, and trying to figure out what works for you in your life, realizing that people either ultimately don't care, or those who do genuinely want the best from you. And there are some people who maybe just don't like you, and that takes a lot of soul searching and maturity to admit and recognize. But I think there's a lot of power once you do recognize that hey, you get to live whatever version of your life you want, and living in the past, maybe having some thoughts that lead to some depression or sadness, or living in the future too much, having anxiety when it comes to that. What it really comes down to is trying to live in the moment and enjoying what you enjoy. And then lastly, speaking to relationships, I think it really does come down to finding those people and surrounding yourself with those people who help you be you, that don't judge you or critique you for being something that you're not. Some relationships you don't really sign up for. You're kind of just, they're there with you, whether that's an in-law or a family member. But besides that, you're not really tied down to any other relationship, and you can decide decide for yourself if you want to or need to cut certain ties or move on from a certain relationship if it's not benefiting you. Relationships, like Ryan mentioned, are two-way streets. You can only try and push so hard, and if at some point it's not being reciprocated as hard as it is, there's no reason to continue that relationship. So got to give Ryan kind of the capstone of the conversation here. If there's anything else you wanted to add or talk about, we'll bring Ryan on in future podcasts for sure. We covered a lot of ground today. We went off on a lot of tangents, but I thought it was a really good conversation about a lot of different stuff. So Ryan, anything else you wanted to leave us with?
No, yeah, thanks for having me on. Glad to be here. Best of luck, all y'all swaggerites in your pursuit of relationships and just trying to figure out who you are and trying to make the best self that you can. And all realistically, I just kind of want to give a plug to McKay because I think this is an individual who is so dedicated to being the best self that he can be. And I think, take advice. He's got a lot of brain power, very, very intelligent man, and whether that comes off or not, I know he's got a lot of really, really great ideas. So listen in every week. He's gonna learn some stuff.
Appreciate that, man. Well, I appreciate you guys tuning in and listening to Swagger, the podcast, episode 3. We'll have some future episodes coming out in the weeks to come, but I appreciate Ryan coming on. We'll have him on some more podcasts in the future. So appreciate you guys listening, and until next time, peace.
Good job, dude.
Thanks, brother. That was good. We rocked an hour.